Thank you for your patience. The meeting is now live.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Right, let's start off. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Schools Forum. I'm Dave Jones, and I'm chairing the meeting today. Members of the public are invited to view this meeting online, and the meeting is recorded. Forum members are requested to keep their microphones on mute and to only turn these on when they are called to speak. If you have any questions or comments to make on the reports, please use the chat function and simply state RTS, which is request to speak. I'm just going to ask everyone to confirm their presence. So I'm going to go through my list. First, I think I've seen most of these. Jackie Collins.
Yeah, I'm here.
I'm here. David Japes isn't here. Cher.
Yes, I'm here.
Jason Crouch. No. Joe Cooper.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Laura Flitton. No. Anne Chapman. No. Victoria Page. Sean Preston.
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you. Nathan Waits.
Yeah, here.
Miss Hartingham. Chris Pennell. Caroline Corcoran. No. Sharon Burt's not here. Susie Horton.
Yeah, I'm here.
Claire Udy. Judy Smythe.
Judith Smythe, St Jude Ward Councillor, present.
Thank you. Lynn Stagg. Terry Norton.
Yeah, I'm present, Chair.
Thank you. Mike Gaston. No. Cara Jewell.
Present.
And then the officers, we've got Alison Edgerton.
Yes, I'm here.
Angela Mann.
I'm here.
Mike Stoneman.
Yeah, I'm here.
Sarah Daly.
Yep, I'm here.
And Jane Didino.
I think it's Karen Martin instead of Jane Didino, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay, and is there anyone here who I haven't mentioned?
Yeah, I'm here, Mindy Butler.
Okay, thank you, Mindy. Okay, we'll move on to the main agenda then. First of all, Alison, apologies for absence.
Yes, I've had apologies from absence from David Jeeps, Sharon Burt, Councillor Lynn Stagg, Nis Hardingham and Laura Flitton.
Thank you. And first of all, the opportunity for anyone to declare any change to declarations of interest. No. And then Alison, any updates there?
I am still outstanding some declarations of interest for Victoria Page, Anne Chapman and Chris Pennell.
Okay. And you'll be chasing those up?
I will be, yes.
Thank you. Membership changes, Alison.
Okay, so since the last meeting, we had 3 members confirmed in another 2-year tenure, which is Jackie Collins, Jason Crouch and Nis Hardingham. So thank you very much for agreeing to stand for another 2 years. I've got 1 vacancy, which is the secondary academy representative vacancy. Again, I have chased schools, but I'm not getting any response on that, so I shall keep on doing that. And additionally, we've got obviously the Schools Forum chair with David Jeep standing down, with the chair is now vacant. I did send out a note to all Schools Forum members a few weeks back, and I've not had any response. So rather than put anybody on the spot today, we have contacted several individuals to ask whether they would be interested, and if anybody would like to discuss the position of chair. Mike Stoneman and myself will wait behind at the end of the meeting, and we can have a chat, or if that timing's not suitable, we can arrange a separate meeting to go through that with you. And that's all I've got on membership.
Thank you, Alison, and well done to those people who are coming on for another 2 years. Thank you all. Okay, now minutes of the previous meeting.
Dave, Dave, sorry, before we go on, I think Terry Norton wanted to come in, sorry.
Sorry, that's only just come up on mine.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, no, it was only just while we were on the subject, and in David's absence, while we are chair free, to thank him on behalf of the Conservative Group for 10 years of diligence as chair. But it seemed like a good point to add that.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. Absolutely. I know Alison's already sent him a note of thanks, but I think that can be added to this, can't it? So thank you. Okay, over to...
We all join those thanks.
Okay, thank you. Over to the minutes of the previous meeting. We need to ensure this is a correct record of the meeting held on the 19th of January. So I'm just going to ask generally, are members happy with this as a correct record? If not, please put RTS in the chat and I'll come to you. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. Okay, so I've no dissent. So the minutes of the previous meeting have therefore been approved, and there are no matters arising from that meeting. So item 5 then, the dedicated schools grant for 22-23, and over to Angela for this one.
Thank you, Dave. So this follows the report that we had last month that detailed the methodology for the schools block of DSG and also the central school support block of DSG. Hopefully you've had time to read the report, but some of the main things that I just wanted to sort of highlight are for the early years DSG. The report details the increase in rate for the hourly amount that we're getting, and our indicative funding is still likely to reduce by about £1 million because it's based on the census and a reduced number of hours, and it could reduce further depending on the January 2022 census. A consultation on the use of the additional funding per hour was conducted, and the details of how that full hourly amount is broken down in table 1. And apologies, I don't know whether you've noticed we've had gremlins in the report, so I think the report that was in your pack after table 1 doesn't have any table numbering, so where we refer to the tables, I will refer to them in the paragraph numbers. Nathan, did you?
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to interrupt your train of thought, but I just wanted to ask the question in relation to early years and saying about decrease in funding. And that's obviously linked to the census data. Do you feel that that's a true reflection of the number of children within those settings, or is it representative of those children who were purely in that setting on that day, and therefore COVID and isolation and things like that might have had an impact? And so therefore, if normally there are more children, what impact is that going to have on those settings?
I think I mean, I think it's hard to be precise, but I think it was always foreseen that the demographics would mean that we would be seeing a reduction in hours to this sort of scale anyway. But COVID definitely, will have had some sort of impact on everybody's lives. But I know Mindy is here, and Cara, I know you've just put your hand up as well. So that they're closer to it as well. But I think there is seen to be an increase in the numbers, and we're waiting for the January 22 census. So things will be clearer, and sort of how the census counts numbers is a bit different as well. So Mindy, I don't know whether you've got anything to add about that, and then Cara.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think last year we had, we had a low number of children sort of start at the beginning of January, and I think people were quite shy of coming back into settings, even though they were open for all. I think we did have a slow start back, and certainly numbers have increased. It, did slowly increase throughout that term and then into the summer. So it's really difficult to tell. At the moment, it looks like the numbers have gone up. Certainly from last year, but not that significantly. But we haven't really had a chance to look at this year's data properly yet. Cara, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Mindy. Yeah, I think a lot of providers found there was a drop in numbers. Obviously, a lot of parents were very worried about COVID, so obviously that's an impact. And I would like to speak on this item quite a bit later, if that's okay, please.
Yeah, of course, Cara. So back over to you, Angela.
Oh, thank you. Right. So turning to the high needs block, the report details all the different areas that make up the high needs block DSG, and of particular importance in terms of the proportion of the DSG, high needs DSG is specialist places. And the report details the 3% increase that we propose on all element 3s for the high needs block. And the report also details a 3-year forecast that we've done for the first time, and so that we could see how secure the financial planning was. And it shows that even if there's not a change in our funding for the following 2 years, the DSG carry forward would be able to cover any short-term deficits, and that's in table 8.4. And we've also allowed a 1% contingency for in-year pressures because of the uncertainty of what COVID might bring. But the table still shows that we have a 1.8 million of carry forward that hasn't been allocated yet, and that could be considered for one-off either invest to save or different projects that we might want to invest in. And then finally, a new thing for 22-23 is the high needs supplementary funding. We're still waiting for the guidance from the SFA as to how this is distributed, but we anticipate that we will be distributing it per commission place for specialist places in the city, and for out of city it would be based on actual places. Once the SFA have clarified their guidance, we propose that officers of the council will look at different options to come up with the values and agree this approach with the special schools and alternative provision settings, and then only come back to schools forum to bring back options if there isn't a clear agreement. So that's a bit different for the 22-23 budget. And I don't need to really say this, but I'm happy to take questions in relation to the report.
Thank you, Angela. Cher, you've got a question.
Yes, I wanted to ask, it might be me just missing something. I wanted to ask a question
Sorry,
about.
Cher, could you speak up a little bit or get close to the
Sorry,
microphone?
it might be me missing something. Can you hear now?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a question about the table directly underneath 7.2, which is about the estimated revenue impact of the high needs places, the 3-year forecast. The numbers in the table above appear to steadily sort of grow, and yet there's a strange dip in the funding in 24-25, and I didn't understand why, especially with the special schools, that seems to go down dramatically in that year, and I didn't understand why.
You are right. I don't know whether we've got another gremlin in that table actually, that you spotted. Alison, did you spotted that?
We have double checked these. I am just going into the master document that we have at the moment to see if I can explain it. I think it's due to the increase, and because it's to do with, just bear with me a second. Yes, what happens is that we have a large increase between 23-24. The 24-25, the actual estimated cost of the element 3 evens out because it's the part year effect on those particular headings, but we'll double check that just to make sure and come back if there's any issues.
Thank you. I did have another question, if that's okay.
Yep, go ahead.
And it's not, it's related to income to schools. I'm just wanting to ask, in light of the recent acknowledgement by the government that increased fuel costs are having a big impact, and their kind of agreement to pay households something to help them out. I wondered if there's any news or any talk about schools getting any support with the increased fuel costs. Because especially for schools that are working with lower numbers intake and tight budgets, and a massive increase in fuel costs is a big issue. Has there been any discussion about it?
I'm not aware of any supplementary guidance that's come out about help with those additional costs, I'm afraid.
No, the only information we're aware of is the supplementary grant which has come out for special schools and for mainstream schools, but that is more geared towards the additional costs being seen to do with the health and social care levy and the potential increase of newly qualified teachers' salaries. There's no particular mention of additional additional support relating to fuel.
Is that something that we as a local authority would have some voice about?
In terms of making a request, raising the issue. I can raise it through our South East Officers Finance Group, which obviously would feed back. We do have representatives of the DfE on that particular group, but it could be something actually that might be better placed to be taken back through the Regional Schools Commissioner, and I don't know whether Mike or Sarah would have any comments on that.
Yeah, certainly I could raise that with Claire Burton, the Regional Schools Commissioner for the South East and South London. So yeah, really happy to do that, and I think it's a fair point, Cher. So yeah, I'll take that one away. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cher. Thank you, Mike. Jackie.
I'll get there eventually. Sorry, Dave. Yeah,
right.
mine's just a point of accuracy. On Appendix 2 under inclusion centres, it says that Devonshire has 11 places, but we only have 10. So just get that accurate.
Thank you, Jackie.
Okay, I'll feed that back to our high needs inclusion team because they've given us those particular place numbers.
Yeah, I had a letter through from Liz and it said 11, so I replied and said it's not 11, and she sent me a new amended letter. So
Thank you, Jackie. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, any more questions?
I'm aware.
Tara?
Hello, Dave. If I could go back to 5.1, well, the sort of 5.1, 5.2, the table that links with that, please. I am aware with early years that obviously the government funding hasn't been increased substantially. However, I am quite concerned at the increase that's been offered. Obviously, there is a pass-through to settings, but the base rate is the rate that most people are working with because nobody else has guaranteed all the other rates. There's a base rate increase that's been offered of 18 pence for a 2-year-old and 14 pence for a 3 and 4-year-old. The 2-year-old increase of 18 pence after the staff increases that are anticipated in April will actually leave settings at a loss of 3 pence per hour. For those who aren't familiar with early years, the government set the ratio of 1 adult to 4 children. So I'm working on the maximum ratio of 1 to 4. There'd be 18 pence increase, but that would be 59 pence of wages, roughly 2 pence of national insurance, and roughly 14 pence on, 2 pence on pension and 14 pence on national insurance, which gives a loss of 3 pence per hour for that staff member. If you move on to the 3 and 4-year-olds, the ratio is higher, so it's 1 member of staff to 8 children, which would actually give a 4 pence per hour gain once the staffing costs had been paid. However, 3 of those gains would have to be offset to pay the difference with the 2-year-olds, so to cover that loss, which then leaves 5 children and you're gaining 20 pence per staff member. Obviously, there is a significant rise in all costs coming in April, and I have been asked feedback from providers that they are very concerned.
Thank you, Cara. Is this another point, Mike, that we want to raise with the Regional Schools Commissioner?
Yeah, possibly. Well, we certainly can do that. I'd be interested to know if colleagues have got any other responses to what Cara's just gone through. But yeah, we could certainly do that. Yeah, I'm sure that will be something I can take forward. Yeah. But I don't know if Alison or Angela wants to come back in on this issue.
I don't know. The Mindy's got better links actually.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I do agree with what Cara said. It is a national problem, and it's something that we're very, very aware of and concerned about. I think, as she said, with the increase in fuel costs and cost of living over the next few months, is going to present more significant challenges for providers and who are already struggling anyway. So, I absolutely endorse what Cara's just said, but as I say, it is a national problem, and it is an ongoing conversation within the sector. It's not only Portsmouth, but it is of great concern to us.
Thank you. Nathan, did you want to come in there?
Just a very quick question for clarity and understanding, really, that obviously we identified that mainstream schools and special schools have got a potential for a supplementary grant coming. Presumably early year settings wouldn't have access to that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And there's no suggestion of a similar scheme coming for them? Okay.
That's shaking heads for the minutes.
And that's something I can point out when I correspond with the RSC. Just make that very point, Nathan. Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah. And I think we're all aware it is very, very tight, a nursery. Cher,
yeah, I was just wanting to endorse what everybody's saying, and just to say I think it is important that we do say something about these things, even though they're national problems. It's important that we take our part in challenging them, because it's not okay. So thank you for being willing to take it somewhere.
Cara, is that a legacy hand or a new hand?
No, sorry, that's a new hand. I'm just wondering if there is any wiggle room on that base rate. I appreciate there needs to be some contingency, but whether or not it could be looked at further. I appreciate numbers have dropped and census will impact funding, but I am very worried that providers will end up out of business, or some places are putting up 10 pence per hour on a working parent. Whatever you do is going to impact parents. I do know that often what's said is, well, if settings close, a new one will open. I appreciate that, but what about quality for these children?
I don't know why we didn't get that feedback in the consultation. We didn't, we only got one reply to the consultation, which I can't remember whether it closed in December, and it would have been helpful to have had that information then for us to have worked on. Yeah, sorry, Cara.
Sorry, I can answer that, Angela. Some people just accepted it because they thought there was no point arguing. It also came out after a number of settings are closed for Christmas, which I appreciate was when the DFE released the information, but it wasn't a good time for providers, and you can imagine it was on my list to do and I never got there, and some of the more vocal providers didn't. I had hoped to get a personal survey out to providers, but personal circumstances have prevented that. But I have had a number who've said to me they are really worried.
Well, I mean, in terms of our proposal is that the early years budget is set out as the report, but obviously Schools Forum is here to vote on it.
I mean, if Angela, if differences are made, or we'd have to have something that would, a proposal that would come back to us, really, wouldn't we? Because we couldn't ask for,
It will be for, we would need to think about, I mean, it's for endorsement, and then the cabinet member makes the decision. As we've set out in the table, it funds the hourly rate that goes to the providers, but it also pays for the support that the council provides to the early years settings. So we'd have to look at what any impact that might mean. So it's very, very tight. We have a statutory duty to agree the budgets by the end of February, 28th of February, I think it is. And also, the providers will want certainty as well in terms of what the hourly rate is going to be going forwards.
Okay, thank you. There's a few more questions, I think. Sean?
Thank you. Yeah, just a point of clarity, I just want to confirm that provided the expenditure for the early years block, which is in Appendix 1, is the 13,329 for next year. That is equal to the funding being provided through the early years block. So if there is a suggestion that additional funding needs to go through to providers, we're either looking at overspending on DSG, or it's like Angela was just saying there, we're then looking at potentially what those services are that are funded through that 13,329. Just want to confirm that's my understanding is correct there in terms of the only possible avenues we have if we were to even consider looking at increasing the funding rate to providers.
Yeah, that's correct. And you've also got to remember that any sort of DSG carry forward is a one-off source of funding. And so if we did do something with the hourly rate and it wasn't funded within that budget, then there would be implications going forwards. So it wouldn't be sustainable to come out of that funding. If our census numbers are lower than that from last month, then we'll still have a proportionate rate in the hourly funding, so it will be affordable. But it will impact on the funding that the council gets. But yes, we are looking at, we've allocated all the funding basically for the early years DSG. So yes.
Okay, thank you. Judith?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think early is a really important, probably the most important bit of all of this. After quite a life, especially for children who come from homes where they're not getting a very good home learning environment. What if I suppose I want to build on the answer you gave to that previous question, which probably was half of what I put my hand up to ask. Angela, if there had been a significant group of people who'd done these sums and come back in December for with those views, what would you have done? What would the solutions have been? Or perhaps it's a question for Susie. But I mean, I don't. I mean, I think certainly we should be making a fuss about this up the line. And if you add, fuel costs to that, then they're going to be even more in deficit. But I mean, meanwhile, what would the solution have been had people got in time with this observation? Thank you.
If we'd have had different, if we'd have had the responses coming in with different things, we would have had a section in the report to look at the different options and detail what the different impacts would have been, to been able to inform schools forum members of what the different scenarios might mean, so that you could have then picked from the different options. But as we didn't get that feedback, then we've only put forward one option, which is per the consultation that we sent out.
Judith, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. Thank you. The options would have been what? What sort of actual options are there? I mean, I'm guessing that this is not in itself a very huge amount of money, but it is really important that we don't have good early years providers going out of business.
I mean, I suppose in terms of the retained 3 pence that is being proposed, you're right, it isn't a huge amount of money. In terms of what could have been released back to providers, and apologies, the number escapes me at the moment. But I suppose it's it's looking at different models to deliver the support really, looking at different options that we could do in terms of what it would cost to do that, different support that might be available for those different options, whether or not we included something in the council's budgets to put forward as a pressure, and those would have been the sorts of options that we would have been looking at. And I think we did look at what funding. I think it was a couple of years ago. We had quite a lot of consultation feedback, and we did review the suggestions on the proposals, and we did manage to increase the funding that went to the providers, and still hopefully everybody agrees, supported the early years sector as well.
I mean, the second question related to this, if I might, Chair, I hope that's all right, is that's it. Presumably all of that is taking into account, I believe, a 6.6% in the minimum wage, which some staff in nursery settings will be getting. Is that right?
So in terms of I'm not sure we really see the mechanisms behind the early years DSG awards that we get, whereas the schools block and the high needs block have the funding formulas behind them, so we know why they've changed things. And for the early years DSG, we get given the amount and told, you know, how it changes on an hourly basis for Portsmouth. So there hasn't been, as far as I know, a release to say, well, you know, you should be able to afford the, you know, the minimum wage and this is the amount for that. It doesn't go into that sort of detail. And you know, things have changed, I suppose, quite a bit, haven't they? Since, you know, it feels like things have changed quite a lot since the beginning of December when we first, you know, got the announcement about the early years as well.
So it's possible that the rise of the minimum wage by 6.6%, I believe it is, isn't taken into account, in which case the early years providers are going to be in an even worse situation. Is that possible? And in which case I do think, Mike, this needs to be taken up the line, because it's, I believe the 6.6% for the rise in the minimum wage hasn't been public very long. So maybe there is a window to go back on this.
Yep, I will raise that as well as part of my response. Thanks, Judith.
Thank you. I'm going to try and get the order right. I think Cher's next. I think waiting the longest.
Yes, it's fine. Again, a lot of what I was thinking has been said. I speaking as a governor at a nursery that has to put wages up, not only in line with the minimum wage, but also because of Portsmouth policies, which we, you know, we like the idea of paying our staff well. It just gets unrealistic in terms of keeping settings going, and I can completely understand why, you know, all childcare workers are really struggling with some of these costs. So I agree, we need to do something. I think maybe we need to look at making our consultation processes fit the audience that they're geared to a little better sometimes. I don't know, clearly this has gone a bit awry, and I'm not saying that's your fault. I'm just saying clearly we haven't got the message back as we needed to. But I do think we need to look at something, and if we have to agree this at the moment, then we need to look at some kind of supplementary payment or some way of supporting, even if it is for a year until we can get our act together next year, in terms of who knows what will change before then. I think we've got to help people ride this wave, and it is quite a frightening wave for a lot of people at the moment.
So I'm not even sure, is that possible, Angela? I mean, obviously with the short-term nature of having to go to, you know, approval by the 28th of February, we realistically wouldn't have time, would we?
No, I mean, I think really what I think what Cher's sort of suggested is perhaps one-off funding, and that might be you know, a suggestion, which wouldn't actually affect the 22-23 you know, budget that we have to agree, but it's about keeping things sustainable for the future. And like I say, the DSG carry forward is a one-off source of funding, and it would soon go. So, but you know, and the increase in the minimum wage, etc., are ongoing costs. You know, the increase in heating, you know, looks as though it'll continue. You know, it's not a blip for next year. And you know, whilst we did the supplementary grants last year, you know, that was within sort of the early years DSG funding that we had that year. because of all the different ways that the government was changing how we were having our funding calculated because of COVID. So what we'd be looking at if we wanted to look at options would really be the one-off carry forward. I think in the table was at 8.4 in the paragraph 8.4 that we'd be talking about. That's sort of the room, but obviously then, like I say, that's a temporary thing, and it removes it could impact on funding in schools in 3 years' time, for example, and things like that. So it's all about balancing things. But it does sound as though there's a lot of pressure in the early years, and whereas the 17 pence per hour, for the 3 and 4 year olds, sounded okay compared to previous increases, there are a lot of costs that we foresee for 22-23.
Thank you, Angela. Cara and then Nathan.
Thank you, Chair. I think the only place that we could realistically take money from is the contingency fund. Now, I appreciate that we want to be cautious with the contingency for new numbers, but actually, if you look at the rise that's been offered to the base rate in comparison to the contingency fund, I haven't had a chance to calculate the exact percentage, but the contingency fund is raising by about 40%. The base rate looks like it's raising by about 15%. Obviously, that's not been calculated, but maybe we're being too cautious with the contingency, especially if there is likely to be an increase in census. Now, I appreciate we're working on previous figures and the new census hasn't been, but there's going to have to be something somewhere because providers will be closing.
Chair, could I respond about the contingency to give an update on where we are for this financial year? Just last week, we received the allocation adjustment for the census data that was submitted in October. That allocation was a reduction in our funding of 1.1 million. We obviously haven't got the January census data, and we'll have a further impact on our funding in July next year that relates to the January to March period. We have looked at our budget monitoring this morning, and while looking at the budget monitoring, we noticed with the 2-year-olds, our forecast position for 2-year-olds will use all of that contingency because our numbers look like they may have increased slightly compared to the impact that we've had on the funding. So we're already using the contingency to offset the 2-year-old funding that we're paying out. Now, I'm hoping that will lead through in January, so when we get the January adjustment, to a little bit of an increase in our funding. But looking at the 3 and 4 year olds, we are still seeing a reduction in those 3 and 4 year old numbers. So I am expecting to see a decrease on those. If we were to use the contingency, it's not going to be a huge amount of additional that we could cut. We certainly couldn't cut the 2-year-old contingency. There is the risk that you cut the contingency if numbers do grow and the contingency isn't sufficient, that we could then potentially end up going back to providers and cutting rates in future years, which we really wouldn't want to do. So I hope that kind of gives a little bit more background around the contingency position.
Thank you, Alison. Nathan.
So I'm just curious to know, and I'm not going to put you on the spot because I appreciate you don't necessarily have those figures to hand, but if we were to, let's say, endeavour to make a situation where effectively it was break even and therefore those additional costs, living wage increases, etc., health and social care levy were absorbed, I'm just curious to know what that would look like, across the city, and is that sort of 5,000, 50,000, 500,000 pounds, which I appreciate you don't necessarily have the answer to. And then secondly, I think more of a point is that actually, if providers are struggling and potentially need to reduce resources, etc., that they have, or at risk of closure, there is a potential impact on those 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds within the city, that then potentially some of the issues caused by that, either in their development, in their progress, etc., then subsequently will feed into schools in future years as well. So it's not necessarily just an issue about those early year providers today, but actually for the children of the city in the future as well.
Okay, Judith, you wanted to come in there?
This is really a sort of more process question. Is it possible, Angela, or
Alice,
it is possible to for this forum to vote in support of the proposal, but to put in a qualifying statement which would press the need for to check these figures with the government and to ensure that there is the possibility of actually asking for additional money for this. I mean, this government, for all their faults, do say that they believe in early years and they believe in, and it may just be they haven't done the sums properly because a lot of people didn't during the consultation. Is it possible to approve a qualified a budget with a qualifying statement? I appreciate it'll come right back to Susie and to deal with, but I do think it's quite an important point, this all.
I think, I mean, in terms of the voting, Alison's probably leafing through the reams of guidance that we have about responsibilities for Schools Forum and what we can and can't do at the moment. But I mean, certainly, as part of our minutes, we detail the actions that we're all going to take. And so all the actions about raising things that we've already discussed will be in the minutes and we will act upon them. In terms of setting the budget and improving the budget, it will be going to actually, is it the 28th that we have to submit it?
Our budget has to be approved by the 28th of February because I need to notify special schools of their budget shares by the 28th of February. So the DSG as a whole has to be approved by the 28th of February. It goes to Cabinet Member next week. It's a Cabinet Member decision, and Schools Forum are there to help inform that decision as far as the legislation and the Schools Forum guidance is concerned. So the Cabinet Member will take the views of Schools Forum in making that decision.
Thank you, Alison. Sean, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, it's very clear from all colleagues around the virtual table here, everyone is very sympathetic and empathetic to the position of early years providers. Personally, from my perspective, I'm not against the use of contingency to support early years providers. However, I personally don't feel like we're in a position to be able to give it meaningful thought and discussion at this meeting. And so I have one question first and foremost from a process point of view. I'm assuming that any spend from contingency doesn't need to be approved today, and that could be something that could come back at a future meeting in the interest of moving the conversation forwards. And secondly, I do think Angela's point earlier that we have to be very, very carefully minded to here is if there is an additional payment made for this year, it needs to be made very clear to all providers that this is not fixed and set in stone for future years because of affordability in the future, as Angela's made out as well. We don't want to be putting ourselves in a situation where, for whatever reason, DSG is in serious risk of being in deficit, because we don't want to be following other authorities who have gone down a very, very deep black hole that they'll never come out of as well. So I just wanted to sort of make that point as well. I think it's a really important point, although, like I say, I'm very much in support of using contingency for this year if the risk is not that great in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. That'd be more sort of one-off payment type element rather than anything long term. The other point there is about coming back to Chair touching earlier, is just about the consultation element. And again, it's really hard because the timings are such that coming out over Christmas, and just after Christmas, and everyone coming back with, the new year, new COVID, and everything like that. That it's a tricky process, and whether or not we can either use, Mindy or Cara to sort of help with that element of the consultation, with consultations as we go forward as well. Cara, your hands up, and Mindy. So Cara first.
Sorry, just going back to Alison's point about the contingency, I really do understand whatever we do here is going to be difficult. Just wondering if there is wiggle room for, say, another 1 pence an hour just on the 3 and 4 year olds, because I think something's going to have to give somewhere, and whatever way we do it, we're going to be eating into contingency money somewhere.
I think it's probably worthwhile pointing out that there's two contingencies. So there's the contingency that we've built into the early years, which is due to the fact that we get our funding, the local authority gets their funding based on the norm is that it's January census, and that covers I can't even remember which years now, but it covers a whole year, with the thought process that you get your lowest numbers in the autumn term because everybody's gone to school, so everybody's starting to turn 3 and 4. Then the spring term is your average, and then summer term your numbers are higher. And actually, if somebody turns up the day after census, we still pay that money, or if they turn up on the 1st of February, we will still pay, but Portsmouth doesn't get any more funding for that. And so that's what that contingency is for. And then in the report as well, we've got the overall DSG carry forward, which will help smooth out, any big issues that we might have. But yeah, so that's why there's the contingency in year on the early years, because of the changes in actuals. It is different to how Portsmouth is funded, which is why we've got the pressure now on the 2-year-olds, because the activity was a bit different to the census information we've had. Yeah, Cara, you might.
Sorry, it was just, I do really appreciate that, but for a number of years, the early years underspend was used to support the high needs block, and now we're talking about early years struggling. It's kind of like, well, we can do it as a one-off, which I appreciate, but early years cannot keep giving. And I, as a manager of a setting, am really concerned that if the costs increase, eventually we're going to have to put costs of additional services onto parents of children in deprivation, and we may just lose those children, and then they are lost in the system and not attending the setting. There is nowhere else we can go if we only have funded children.
Okay. Mindy, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I just wanted to say about the consultation that it was a shame that everything comes out so late, but we did at the very beginning of the term, we did sort of contact quite a number of settings in our daily contacts anyway, and just remind them of the consultation. I just think people were, I think as Cara said, everybody's had lots of COVID issues, and we hit the ground running at the beginning of January, so maybe that's why we didn't get the responses back that we would normally, because it was the same consultation period as it normally is. But we have puzzled over why people didn't respond so much this time. But we did do a bit of chasing, so I just wanted to make you aware of that.
Thank you, Mindy. Okay, so I think we've got some very clear actions from Mike about taking our concerns back. We've got some questions about possible use of a one-off contingency to explore. Alison, Angela, is that, is that what we're saying?
Yeah, I mean, Alison's just obviously done some calculations in the background, and has just put in the comments about if it can help. It looks as though we probably can free up a penny. So out of the 3 and 4 contingency. So if, like I say, Councillor Horton, tends to hear, people's views and things. So if that is something that people would support, then I'm not quite sure the mechanics, but we'll need to look at, well, I mean, the report's out now in terms of that, but obviously Councillor Horton can make a change to, the recommendations that we put forward for the report. So if that is helpful, then it's probably worthwhile voicing your support for that, so that she can take that into account when she catches up with this meeting.
Okay, I'm not sure the mechanics of that either. I think we can note in the minutes certainly that there are a number of members of Schools Forum who have expressed concern about funding for early years. Sorry, I'm trying to see Cher's point now. Yeah, okay, and Cher said, and recommend an increase or look at one-off payments. We don't need to decide where from. We can endorse that report, so we can put that can go into the minutes. Yeah, Alison, any further comments?
I think there's probably no further comments, but I think with the 3 and 4-year-old contingency, we could potentially move a penny from that and not have a major impact on the DSG. It could be tight. It's just so difficult to know because we just don't know what's happening with pupil numbers over the course of the coming year. And if our census takes our funding down, but actual pupil numbers increase, that's where the contingency is helping us. But if we were to move a penny from the 3 and 4-year-olds and put that on the 3 and 4-year-old rate, I think we can probably afford that, and it wouldn't leave us with too big a risk within the DSG.
Okay, thank you. Cara?
So final point for me, could I just thank Alison for her work in the background there, because I appreciate she wasn't anticipating that, but obviously I'm trying to be the voice of providers as well, so.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, what I think we will do then, we've talked a lot about, I just want to make sure we've talked a lot about sort of 2-3-year-olds. Are there any other parts of the proposals that people want to raise now? I just want to make sure nothing's missed. No, okay. In that case, what we need to do is look at the endorsements that we've got ahead of them. What I would propose, and anyone can correct me if they don't feel this is right, we endorse them as a whole, all 6, but we add a note about what we've said about the penny rise from Alison. Would that make sense? Yeah? Okay then. So everyone's entitled to vote on this. So it's recommended that the Schools Forum endorse the 6 elements 1.11 to 1.16. Do I have a proposer for this? Thank you, Sean. And do I have a seconder? Thank you, Nathan. Okay, the recommendation has been proposed and seconded. I'll now take the vote by affirmation of the meeting as permitted within the regulations. If there is no dissent, the proposal is passed. Are there any objectors to this recommendation? Sorry, Nathan's put an RTS in just after his seconding. So, Nathan, please.
Sorry, I was actually typing away, but so in the basis that we're endorsing it, but can we also, in addition to that, formally express concern as Schools Forum about the apparent current lack of any supplementary funding for early years, which schools are potentially going to be benefiting from? Which is a side note to approving this, so apologies, I probably got in there too quickly.
That's okay, and I think that can be made quite clear in the minutes. I think there's a lot of common ground there, Nathan. Thank you. So, if sorry, Judith, is that?
Presumably, we're also putting a note to say that we are very worried about the costs of fuel on schools, because, and I know Mike has taken an action.
Yeah, I'll be taking that
up.
up.
It does affect the viability of this budget, and it is very short-sighted of the government not to have made explicit what they were thinking about that.
Yeah, I'll be picking up on the minimum wage costs as well as part of that communication. Yeah.
Yes, that was the other thing I was going to raise, but I took it you would. But I think we're in a genuinely difficult position to approve a budget when those unknowns are hanging over us. I realise what we're doing, and I realise there's a contingency, but it is irresponsible of us to use a contingency at this stage when those sort of potentially rather large things are hanging over us.
Yeah, thank you. And I think those things we'll make sure they are clear in the minutes, which will go to Susie Horton. Okay, so we've had a proposer, we've had a seconder. I'm just going to give a pause now if there is any dissent. Okay, thank you. That recommendation's been approved. Thank you, everyone. So that concludes the meeting for today. Thank you, everybody. A really good conversation about some quite tricky challenges for our early years. The next meeting is scheduled for the 25th of May. And then I know Mike wants to talk about the being chair afterwards.
Yeah, just I put my hand up there just to say that if anybody does want to stay on and have a chat with myself and Alison about the chair, or indeed the vice chair, we'd be really happy to go through what the expectations are, time commitments and so forth. So yeah, happy to stay on for that. Okay, and is there somebody else with a hand up? Is that Cara? You've still got your hand up? Is that a legacy? No, it's a legacy. Thank you. That's good. Okay, then we'll I'm going to ask Jane. Not Jane, no, is it? It's Karen to end the live stream.
I'll do that now.
Okay, thank you. And then once that's done, we will stay behind and all those people have a lovely chat with Mike.